The celebration lasted 3 days. The main hall of the central military station of the Vret Dominium was filled with noise and light. Soldiers cheered, and officers drank. Hollow displays played the same image over and over again, a shattering planet, its surface in flames, its oceans turning to steam. The Universal Republic had become the 130th civilization to fall before the Vret fleet. It had taken less than 2 weeks to conquer them. In the end, the Republic had begged. They had sent their leaders in small ships to surrender personally, kneeling before one warlord after another in the hope of mercy. Mercy was not granted. High Overlord Vretnal stood on a dais in the hall, watching his people celebrate. By Vret standards, he was tall, with gray-green, scaly skin and 4 arms that moved with a slow, deliberate grace. His eyes were pale gold, the mark of the ruling blood, and he watched the festivities with the flat, satisfied expression of a man watching something he had already predicted down to the finest detail. 130 victories. Not a single defeat. Not a single moment where another civilization had forced the Vret Dominium to feel anything other than absolute superiority. An adjutant approached and bowed low. The adjutant was young, nervous, and held a tablet with slightly trembling hands. Vretnal did not look at him immediately. He made the young adjutant wait, as custom dictated, before reaching out with one of his lower arms to take the tablet. The report was marked Sector 7, Delta. The primitive designation was Earth. Vretnal scrolled through it slowly. Earth, a solitary planet in an unremarkable star system on the edge of a quiet galactic arm. 1 star, several planets. The intelligent species called themselves humans. They were gentle, soft-bodied creatures with 2 limbs, fragile and short-lived, with an unusual propensity for fighting among themselves. For most of Vret history, Earth had been marked as a pre-contact civilization too primitive to contact, too disorganized to be a threat. Over the decade, several reconnaissance probes had been sent. Most returned with boring data. Humans fought each other. They argued about politics. They built cities and then destroyed them. They were, according to the last survey, a chaotic species without any significant potential for galactic conflict. Then, 6 months ago, one of the reconnaissance probes did not return. Vretnal tapped that section of the report. The probe had entered the outer region of Earth's star system, past the large ringed planet, past the gas giants, and simply ceased transmission. No explosion was recorded, no debris found. It just went silent. His analysts had several theories. The most likely was equipment failure. Perhaps the probe had malfunctioned. Perhaps it had drifted into the gravitational field of one of the outer planets. It happens sometimes, even with Vret technology. But one analyst, a careful and meticulous man named Voskra, had filed a secondary report. Voskra claimed that the probe's last transmission contained a fragment of unusual energy data. The fragment was small and incomplete, but it roughly matched the signature of targeted energy weaponry. In other words, it might have been shot down. Vretnal had read Voskra's report when it first arrived. He had found it interesting. Earth had primitive weapons, kinetic cannons, chemical engines. Perhaps, if humans were smart enough over the past decades, some basic directed energy tools. None of this could threaten a Vret reconnaissance probe. Voskra was being overly cautious. The probe had malfunctioned. He returned the tablet to the adjutant. "Prepare the Eternal Dominium for departure," Vretnal said. His voice was calm and low, carrying the particular tone of a man who had never in his life had to raise it. "Send Warlord Zarvok to Earth. 1 ship." The adjutant blinked. 1 ship? High Overlord? To a planet that, according to the report, has no defensive fleet? "That is exactly why 1 ship is sufficient," Vretnal said. He turned away from the celebration below and walked toward a long window overlooking space. Sending a fleet to Earth would mean Earth deserved a fleet. It did not. 1 ship. Zarvok would deliver standard terms of surrender. If they accepted, they would absorb the planet and its resources. If they did not accept, he would burn their largest population centers until they changed their minds. The adjutant nodded quickly and left. Vretnal lingered at the window for a moment. 130 victories. The number lay comfortably in his chest like a warm stone. No civilization in the known galaxy had resisted the Vret Dominium for longer than a month. Most fell in days. Those who tried to fight lasted a little longer, but the result was always the same. Earth would be no exception. It would be 131. 42 light-years away, in a small office on the 3rd floor of a building that looked from the outside like a government archive, Admiral Caleb Park stared at a data screen and sipped his fourth cup of coffee. The coffee was cold. He had forgotten about it again. Park was over 50. He had a lean face and short gray hair that had turned from black to its current color over the 4 years he had been in charge of the most stressful project in human history. He did not look like a man commanding the most powerful secret military force humanity had ever built. He looked like a man who worked too hard and forgot to eat, but his eyes were sharp, and at that moment, they were reading the same reconnaissance report for the third time. The report had come from a deep space array, one of the many that Earth had quietly placed on the outskirts of the solar system over the past 2 decades, disguised as astronomical observation platforms. Each array was sensitive enough to detect the gravitational trail of a ship moving at high warp speed. They were designed exactly for this moment. A Vret military ship had crossed the monitoring perimeter 4 hours ago. Its identification profile matched the Vret Dominium, one of the heavy conquest ships of the Vret Dominium, a ship that had participated in 47 confirmed planetary subjections. The engine signature indicated it was moving at a standard approach speed, not full combat speed. It wasn't hiding, it wasn't rushing, it was parading. Park set down his cold coffee and pressed a button on his desk. "Bring in Kon and Minjun. Tell them to be in the conference room in 20 minutes, and to bring everything." He stood and walked to his office window. Outside, the city lived its normal life. People went about their business. Children went to school. Somewhere a few blocks away, someone was playing music too loudly. Life was completely ordinary. Park looked at the sky. The day was clear, blue, wide, and calm. He saw the faint white streak where a commercial airliner had passed. He saw a satellite, or what looked like a satellite, catching the morning light, moving slowly across the upper atmosphere. He knew what that object actually was. It was not a satellite. It was the outer layer of a weapon platform that had been commissioned 11 years ago and of which the public had never known. There were 37 such objects in various orbits. There was a reason Earth had never publicly responded to the existence of alien civilizations even after 60 years of confirmed contact data. There was a reason why the deep space arrays were built under the guise of long-term weather forecasting infrastructure. There was a reason why the United Earth Defense Fleet had been training on the dark side of the moon for the last 18 years, conducting drills that never appeared in any public record. Earth knew this day would come. Earth had been preparing. Park turned away from the window, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the conference room. 20 minutes later, the three sat at a table covered with holographic maps and data streams. Dr. Jian Cho was already there when Park arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept, but her eyes were focused and her expression calm. She was around 40, with quick hands and a specific kind of stillness that came not from a lack of fear, but from years of certainty that fear was useless. She was the person who, for 23 years, had taken apart pieces of alien technology and turned them into what? Something better. General Minjun Lee arrived 30 seconds after Park. He was a large man with a quiet way of moving that always seemed slightly off for his size. He had commanded Earth's orbital fortress network for 9 years. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and looked at the Admiral without speaking. Park projected the ship's data onto the main holographic display. The Vret Dominium appeared as a blinking dot of light, slowly moving through the outer solar system. "They sent 1 ship," Park said. Minjun looked at the display. "1 ship. They think that is enough," Jian said. She didn't sound offended. She sounded like she was simply recording information. "By all the metrics they have, they probably are right," Park said. He zoomed in on the display to show the entire solar system. "They have absorbed 130 civilizations. Some of those civilizations had real fleets, standing armies, organized planetary defenses, and none of them stopped even 1 Vret conquest ship." He paused. "They aren't wrong to think 1 ship is enough. As far as they know, it is." "As far as they know," Minjun repeated quietly, with a slight tinge of what wasn't quite a smile. Park looked at him. "How long until the fortress network is fully active?" 6 hours, Minjun said. "Everything was already on standby. We just need to finish the launch sequence and run the final calibrations." Park nodded. He turned to Jian. "The xenotech arsenal?" "Ready," she said simply. "Ready for 2 years. I just need the sanction to move it from storage into active configuration." Park gave it to her with a nod. Jian brought up a secondary display and began going through the checklist. Park watched her for a moment. He had seen her work for over 2 decades. He had seen her sitting in labs for 16 hours, taking apart alien equipment that had no documentation, no instructions, no context, and slowly, carefully figuring out how it worked, and then figuring out how to make it better. The Vret Dominium had been building its military hardware for centuries. Jian Cho had spent 23 years reverse engineering it, improving it, and creating Earth's own version, with a stubborn focus that Park thought was the most human thing he had ever seen. He looked back at the display. The Eternal Dominium was still moving, still parading. "They will issue a surrender ultimatum when they get close enough," Park said. "Standard Vret protocol. They will give a deadline, probably 8 to 24 hours. They expect panic, silence, or negotiations." "They won't get any of that," Min-jun said. "No," Park agreed. "They won't." He looked at the blinking dot of light on the display for one more moment. One ship. The Vret Dominium had sent one ship and done so like someone brushing away a small annoyance. Not looking, not caring, already thinking about something else. Park thought about the 60 years of work that had gone into this moment, about the hidden factories, the training programs, the ships built in the shadow of the moon, the weapon systems that had never fired in real combat, about the thousands of people who had worked in silence under a level of secrecy so deep that their own families did not know what they did. They were all building toward a moment that most of them secretly hoped would never come, but they prepared for it as if it absolutely would. He picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, and set it back down. "Bring in Commander Song," he said. "Tell her to bring the Indomitable to a state of readiness. Tell her the time has come." Outside, the sky was still blue, still calm, still ordinary. It would not be ordinary for much longer. The Eternal Dominium crossed the orbit of the furthest planet at exactly 3:47 Earth time. Its sensors scanned the solar system and found nothing suspicious. No fleet, no fortifications, no energy signatures worthy of note. Just a quiet system with one habitable planet, peacefully situated in the center. Warlord Zarvok stood on his command bridge and watched the planet on the main screen. It was blue, white, and green, and looked soft, like all habitable planets from a distance. He had seen this view 147 times in his career. A new planet, a new civilization, every time the same result. He ordered his communications officer to prepare the surrender broadcast. He did not order the weapon systems to be readied. That could wait. He expected everything to be over by morning. The broadcast began at 6:12. It interrupted all signals on Earth, all television channels, all radio stations, all open network frequencies, all public address systems on every continent. It didn't ask for permission. It just appeared, cutting through everything else like a blade through paper. And suddenly, a face appeared on every screen. And in every speaker, a voice, the likes of which had never been seen or heard on Earth before. Warlord Zarvok watched from these screens with pale, flat eyes. His scales were the color of old iron. He did not try to look intimidating. He didn't need to try. He spoke in Vret, and the translation system, loaded by the Dominium from Earth's own public signals collected over a decade of reconnaissance probes, broadcast his words in English, then Chinese, and then 17 other languages simultaneously. The translations overlapped each other in a low murmur under the main channel. His message was short. He said the Vret Dominium had declared this star system its territory. He said the civilization of Earth had 12 hours to signal unconditional surrender. He said any attempt at resistance would be met with the immediate destruction of population centers, starting with the largest cities. He said that civilizations that surrendered peacefully would be absorbed by the Dominium as a labor class and allowed to continue existing in a weakened form. He said that civilizations that did not surrender would simply be destroyed. He didn't say please. He didn't say he was sorry. He expressed no emotion about it whatsoever. He said it like a person reading a list of instructions, flat, calm, already thinking about the next step. Then the broadcast ended, and every screen on Earth returned to what it had been showing before. And for a moment, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Then, everything happened at once. In cities across all continents, people poured into the streets. Some were scared, some were angry, some stood very quietly, and simply looked at the sky as if expecting to see something there. Emergency services were overwhelmed within minutes. Governments began releasing statements within the hour. All major news networks interrupted their regular programming and replaced it with anchors who were clearly trying to remain calm, while the words spilling from their mouths described the most extraordinary events in human history. World leaders called each other. Scientists called each other. Generals called each other. The United Earth Council convened for an emergency session within 90 minutes. The meeting room was located underground in Geneva, in a facility that officially did not exist. 31 representatives sat at a curved table. Each of them was connected to advisors on secondary screens. And they talked over each other for the first 40 minutes with the particular noise that fills a room when everyone is scared, but no one wants to show it first. Admiral Caleb Park waited. He sat at the far end of the table and waited for the noise to die down. Before him lay a folder. He did not open it. He didn't need to. He knew everything in it by heart. He waited with the patience of a man who had prepared for this meeting for a long time and understood that the people around him needed a few minutes to catch up. Finally, the representative of the North American Council turned to him. "Admiral Park," she said, and the room became a little quieter. "Did you see the broadcast? What is your assessment?" Park looked at the 31 faces along the table. "My assessment," he said, "is that they sent one ship. No fleet, no task force. One ship. They did this because they believe one ship is enough to conquer this planet. They believe this because every other civilization they have ever encountered, at this stage of the process, had already started sending signals of surrender." He paused. "They are soon going to discover that we are not every other civilization." Someone in the middle of the table, the East Asian representative, a gaunt man in glasses with an expression of deep focus, said quietly, "Do you mean we can fight them?" Park said, "that we have been preparing to fight them for 60 years. The fleet is ready, the fortress network is ready, and the weapon systems are ready. We have reverse-engineered their own technologies, improved them, and built defenses they have never seen and cannot currently predict." He let that sink in for a moment. That in 12 hours, when their deadline expires, we will not be sending a signal of surrender. We will be ready." The room was very quiet. The South American representative said, "And if we lose?" Park looked at her. "Then we lose," he said simply. "But I don't think we will, and I believe that if we surrender now, we will lose everything anyway. Not in battle, but forever. The Vret Dominium does not liberate its labor class. It does not let go of conquered civilizations. Surrender means permanent subjection. It is not a risk worth avoiding by surrendering." He swept his gaze across the table. "I am not asking for a vote on whether to fight. I am telling you that the decision was made collectively 22 years ago when this council authorized the construction of the defense fleet. We built it for this reason. Today is that day." Another long silence. Then the East Asian representative took off his glasses, wiped them, put them back on, and said, "What do you need from us?" Park stood. "Continue the broadcast, keep the people informed. Tell them we are responding. Tell them we are ready. Do not tell them to hide, because hiding implies we expect to lose. And we don't." He picked up the folder he hadn't opened. "I need to return to the command post." He walked out of the hall, and the council began talking again behind him, but quieter and more focused, the way people talk when they have accepted what is coming and moved from fear to purpose. Dr. Jian Cho was on the lowest level of Facility 7, standing in a chamber the size of a sports stadium, surrounded by equipment that no outside observer had ever seen and that no public record had ever mentioned. The Xenotech arsenal was not a single weapon. It was a collection of systems. Some were defensive, some were so precisely specialized that they were built to counter exactly one type of Vret technology. Jian had spent 23 years creating this collection. She started with fragments. Pieces of probe equipment had been extracted after the reconnaissance devices had malfunctioned or been quietly shot down. She would bring these fragments into her lab and work on each of them for months, studying the energy principles underlying them, tracing the logic of the engineering, testing, failing, and testing again. The first thing she built from Vret technology was a shield, a small one, barely enough to protect one vehicle, based on an energy deflection field she had discovered in the probe's collision avoidance layer. It took her 4 years to make it work. It took another 3 years to scale it to the size of a ship. Another 6 years to improve it to the point where it could absorb hits the original Vret design couldn't. That was how she worked. She didn't just copy what she found it, understood it, and then asked the question, what would make this better? The Vret Dominium never asked that question about their own technology. They had conquered enough civilizations on existing specifications that they never had to. Their weapons worked, their shields worked, their ships worked. Why change what works? Jian had learned that the answer to that question was, because someone else might change it for you, and they might change it in a way you aren't prepared for. She moved through the chamber, checking systems, watching the readouts. giving quiet instructions to a team of technicians who had worked alongside her for years and who moved through the space with the focused efficiency of people who had activated this sequence in drills more times than they could count. The arsenal was coming to life around her, piece by piece. Energy cells were charging, targeting arrays were aligning, communication channels with the fleet and the fortress network were being confirmed. Every confirmation light that glowed in the chamber was another 60-year-old promise being fulfilled. Her communication channel opened. Admiral Park's voice sounded. "Geon, status?" "Full readiness in 4 hours," she said. "Ahead of schedule." "Good," Park said. "The deadline of Zarvok expires in 6. Then we will be ready with a buffer of 2 hours. How is the disintegration array?" Geon paused. The disintegration array was the last thing she had built. A project that had taken the most time and cost the most, and about whose ethical questions she had pondered more than anything else in her career. It was not a weapon she was proud of. Exactly. It was a weapon she had built because she understood that there might come a moment when nothing else would be enough. "It is ready," she said. "I hope we don't need it." "I hope so too," Park said. The channel closed. General Minjun Lee stood on the command deck of the Orbital Fortress Station 1 and watched his network come online. The stations were not beautiful. They were functional, gray, and heavily armored, built for a purpose, not for appearance. They had been disguised as communication relay platforms for years, and they did indeed relay communications, which made maintaining the disguise easier. But under the relay equipment, under the signal towers and antenna arrays, each station was a weapon platform capable of delivering concentrated energy fire, launching guided kinetic projectiles, deploying a swarm of drones, and projecting localized jamming fields that could disrupt incoming guidance systems. 24 of them, placed in a network across Earth's orbital space, created overlapping fields of fire, meaning any ship approaching Earth would find itself in range of several stations simultaneously and unable to position itself to attack only one. The Vret Dominium had no information about these stations. They had been built quietly, maintained quietly, and operated under a cloak of secrecy for over 10 years. Minjun watched as the power readings rose on his display. Station by station, the network was fully connecting. Green confirmations. All systems operational. He turned to the officer beside him. "Establish a communication channel with the Indomitable." The channel opened, and the voice of Commander Hyun Song was heard. She was 38 years old. She was composed and calm and had commanded the ESV Indomitable for 3 years. She had conducted more combat simulations with Vret ship profiles than any other commander in the fleet. She knew the specs of the Eternal Dominium, as well as she knew her own ship. "General," she said. "Commander Song, your status?" "Ready," she said simply. "Fleet, 17 other ships, all confirmed readiness. Everyone holding position behind the moon, as planned." A short pause. "We have been watching the approach of the Eternal Dominium. It is moving slowly. Combat configuration has not yet been set. They haven't even turned on full amplification of their weapons." Minjun smiled slightly. "Confidence," Song said. "I read the history of their combat operations. Every planet they approached after their 80th conquest, the civilization surrendered before the deadline. They haven't been in a serious fight for a long time." Another pause. "That will play to their disadvantage." "Yes," Minjun said. "It will." 12 hours passed. The surrender signal from Earth did not arrive. Zarvok waited 20 minutes past the deadline, as protocol allowed. He sat in his command chair on the bridge of the Eternal Dominium and stared at the communication display, waiting for the inevitable final signal that always came. A panic transmission from what could be called a planetary government, begging for negotiations, offering resources, promising submission. It didn't come. His communication officer turned away from his post. "No signal, Warlord. The deadline expired 22 minutes ago." Zarvok looked at the blue-white planet on the main screen. It hung there peacefully. Its surface was partially covered by clouds. City lights were visible on the dark side lights of cities full of little soft creatures who apparently didn't understand what was about to happen to them. He wasn't angry. He didn't feel contempt. Exactly. He felt the light, distant bewilderment of a man whose expectation had been slightly inexplicably disappointed. "Weapon systems," he said to his crew. "Aim at the largest population center on the northern continent. Prepare a full-power energy strike. Weapons charging, Warlord." The main weapon array of the Eternal Dominium began to charge. A hum passed through the superstructure of the ship, like a racing heartbeat. Zarvok had heard this sound 147 times. It always ended the same way. "Fire," he said. An energy strike left the Eternal Dominium in the form of a pillar of white-blue light, piercing space at a speed the human eye could not track. On the bridge, Zarvok watched the targeting display and waited for confirmation that the strike had hit its target. He waited. Confirmation did not come. His weapons officer said very cautiously, "Warlord, the strike was intercepted." Zarvok slowly turned his head to the display. On the tactical screen, where the energy pillar should have hit the surface of the planet and caused the familiar explosion signaling the start of every conquest, a completely different image appeared. Something in low orbit had moved. Something had placed itself between the shot and the planet. Something had taken a full-power strike directly and was still there. Zarvok stared at the screen. "What?" he said. Before his weapons officer could answer, 24 objects that had looked like communication towers turned and looked straight at him. The first thing that made Zarvok realize something was wrong was the silence. After a full-power strike from the Eternal Dominium, there is never silence. There is always the sound of his command confirming hits. On the tactical screen, there was always an image of a city plunging into darkness, cracks beginning on the surface, the shock wave spreading from the point of impact. There was always a next step, a second strike, or a message from the planetary leadership offering surrender, or both. None of that was happening now. There was only the tactical screen showing that the energy pillar had hit something and that something had withstood it. Zarvok stood. Before he realized he had stood, he crossed the bridge in 4 long strides and stopped directly in front of the main tactical display, his pale golden eyes trying to make sense of what he saw. The object that had intercepted the strike was an orbital platform. Structurally, it looked like a communication antenna hexagonal, surrounded by what looked like signal equipment moving in a standard orbit. But it moved. It moved quickly, rotating on its axis and presenting a flat surface to the incoming strike. And the flat surface simply took the strike and withstood it. Zarvok had hit planets with full-power strikes. He had hit military ships with full-power strikes. He had hit orbital defenses with full-power strikes. He had never in 147 battles hit something that simply absorbed the energy and kept hanging there. "Analysis," he said to the onboard computer. "Kravis." Kravis spoke from the bridge's central speaker with that cold, precise tone he always used. The platform applied an energy absorption field. The technology appears to be based on Vret deflection architecture, but the conversion coefficient is significantly higher. The platform absorbed approximately 92% of the strike's total output energy. The remaining 8% dissipated as thermal radiation. A short pause. "I note that standard Vret deflection fields operate with a maximum conversion coefficient of 61%. Zarvok stared at the screen. "They improved it," he said. "That is the most accurate interpretation." "Yes," Kravis said. Zarvok turned to look at the rest of the orbital space around Earth. His sensors were now processing data, and what they were detecting was restructuring his understanding of the situation faster than he would have liked. 24 platforms, which he had initially scanned as communication infrastructure, were not communication infrastructure. They were weapon stations. He could see them turning into firing position. All 24 of their angles shifted in a coordinated pattern, indicating a common targeting network. "How long have they been there?" he said. "Based on the density of building material and settling patterns in their orbital paths, I estimate 8 to 12 years, Kravis said. "They were effectively masked. My previous scan did not identify them as weapon platforms." Zarvok realized it. 12 years. Humans had hidden weapon platforms in plain sight for 12 years, and the reconnaissance probes and surveys of the Vret Dominium had never identified them. He put that thought aside. "Weapons," he said. "Full charge. All arrays. Aim at the platforms. Shoot them down before they—" The platforms fired. They did not shoot one by one. They fired in a coordinated salvo that the weapon network of 24 stations produced simultaneously. Each shot was calculated to arrive at the Eternal Dominium from a slightly different angle and at a slightly different moment, calculated so that no 2 hits landed on the same side of the shield at the same time, allowing the ship's deflection system to recharge between hits. Zarvok felt his ship shudder. The deflection field held. It was built for military ship combat and was significantly more powerful than anything the Dominium expected to find on Earth. But the shots continued. The platforms cycled fire at a noticeably high speed for such a size of energy discharge, and the angles constantly changed, always finding a new part of the Eternal Dominium's defensive surface to impact. "Deflection field at 87%, his weapons officer said. Return fire, Zarvok said. All arrays. Focus on the nearest platforms first. The Eternal Dominium opened fire with everything it had. The ship was massive, almost 4 kilometers long, armed with 16 main energy arrays and 48 secondary batteries. And it produced a volume of fire that in previous encounters had turned orbital installations into scattered metal in less than 2 minutes. The platforms took the hits. Their shields absorbed some of the shots. Others broke through and left visible burn marks on the station's hulls. 2 of the 24 stations went dark, their shield systems overloaded, equipment destroyed. Zarvok watched them fall with a small lift of satisfaction. Then 22 continued to fire, and 2 spare platforms, which he hadn't seen during the previous scan, emerged from behind the upper layers of the planet's atmosphere and took their positions. "There are more of them," his sensor officer said, with a note in his voice that Zarvok did not like. "How many more?" "I am still finishing the count," the officer said. "But there are significantly more." Zarvok returned to his command chair and sat down carefully. He brought up a tactical overview on his personal screen and looked at what his sensors were now detecting, continuing the extended scan. The platforms were one level. Behind the platforms, at slightly higher orbits, were smaller defensive objects mines, he realized, disguised as space debris, located in clusters that funneled the approaching ship into kill zones. And in the uppermost layers of the atmosphere, below the network of platforms, there were what appeared to be ground-based defensive drones, deploying in large numbers, rising in spiral formations designed to create overlapping kill zones. It was a layered defense network. Each layer was designed to interact with the others. Remove the platforms and you face mine clusters. Get through the mines and you end up in the drone zones. And all of it was firing at him with weapons that exceeded what should have been possible according to everything the Dominium knew about human technology. "Kravis," he said quietly. "Warlord? These weapon systems, what is their technological basis?" A pause. This pause was a little longer than Kravis's usual response time, which meant the onboard computer was processing something complex. Energy signatures in several systems indicate Vret technological foundations. The targeting architecture appears to be based on Vret sensor design. Shield technology, as noted earlier, is an improvement on Vret deflection fields. Projectile weapons demonstrate characteristics consistent with Vret kinetic arrays. Another pause. However, in all cases, human implementations demonstrate modifications and improvements that do not match standard Vret specifications. They took our technology and changed it. Zarvok paused. He thought about the probe that had gone missing 6 months ago. He thought about the analyst who had filed a secondary report suggesting the probe might have been shot down. He thought about how he had dismissed that report, and how High Overlord Vretnal had dismissed it, and how everyone in the Dominium had looked at Earth and seen a primitive civilization without any significant potential for galactic conflict. He thought about 60 years of reconnaissance probes sent to this system. Some had returned, some had not. Those that hadn't returned, he now felt he knew. What had happened to them? "Deflection field at 68%, his weapons officer said, and there was something in the officer's voice that had changed. The composure that Vret officers maintained in combat had begun to carry a thin tinge of something that was not composure. Zarvok opened a channel to his engineering deck. "I need to boost the deflection field. Cut power from the secondary life support system and auxiliary systems." "Yes, Warlord," the engineer said. "Boosting. But Warlord, based on the incoming fire pattern, boosting our zones is advisable. Each time we strengthen a part of the field, the fire concentrates on the adjacent part. They are tracking our reinforcement patterns." Zarvok stared at his screen. They were reading his ship's defensive reactions and targeting accordingly. "Kravis," he said. "I see it." The onboard computer said, "They possess detailed knowledge of our deflection field mechanics. They know how the system prioritizes reinforcement. They are using an amplification cycle. They had the probe data." Of course they did. Every probe the Dominium had ever sent to this system, those that returned and those that didn't, carried standard Vret technology, standard shielding, standard drive systems, standard sensors. If a human scientist had access to these probes, spent years studying how Vret technology worked based on them, understood the amplification cycle of the Vret deflection field, he had turned his own technology into a map of its weaknesses. Zarvok pushed the thought away. The Eternal Dominium was still a military ship. It was still much larger and more powerful than anything he was currently fighting. 68% defensive power was not a crisis. He had fought battles at 20% and still won. "Move forward," he said. "Move to the planet. Get inside the platform network. Close quarters combat. Use our size advantage." His pilot began the maneuver. The Eternal Dominium moved forward. Its engines pushed into the combat zone, trying to get out of the sub-angle of the platform fire. Zarvok watched the screen and planned his next move. What he didn't see, what his sensors hadn't yet detected because they were located on the far side of the moon and were operating at minimum power specifically to remain below the detection threshold, were 18 ships. They were waiting. They had been waiting for hours. They were waiting for him to move forward. In the command center on Earth, Admiral Park watched the tactical display as the Eternal Dominium began its advance. He had stood at this display for 4 hours, watching the work of the defensive layers, tracking the ship's reactions, noting every change Zarvok made and how long it took him to do it. He turned to Minjun, who stood beside him at the tactical display. "He is moving as predicted," Minjun said. "Tell Commander Song," Park said, "that it is time to flank." Minjun opened the channel. "Commander Song, the Admiral gives the order. Flank the fleet around the moon." There was a short pause, and then the voice of Song was heard, calm and clear. "Understood. The fleet is moving." Park watched the display. The Eternal Dominium was still firing, still moving forward, still deep in the thinking of its warlord. It believed it was engaged in a difficult battle it would eventually win, because it always eventually won. Park thought about the 60 years of work that stood behind this moment. He thought about everyone who had built this, trained for this, and waited for this. He thought about the 130 civilizations that hadn't had 60 years to prepare. He watched the display and waited for Commander Song's fleet to appear on his sensors. They appeared 30 seconds later. 18 ships emerging from behind the edge of the moon in a clean formation, engines at full power. All weapon systems charged and aimed, appearing in open space like a clenched fist. Zarvok's sensor officer would be screaming right now. Park almost felt something like sympathy. Almost. The sensor officer didn't scream. He was trained better. But the way he uttered the words abrupt, strained, without the professional calm that Vret officers had honed for years, told Zarvok everything he needed to know before he even looked at the display. Warlord. 18 contacts appear from the planetary satellite. Engine signatures indicate Warship class. They are. A half-second pause. They are moving to intercept. Zarvok looked at his display. 18 ships. They were not large ships by Vret standards. Each was about 1/5 the size of the Eternal Dominium, but they moved in a tight formation with a precision that indicated not only training but a deep familiarity with each other. They were arranged in 3 offset rows of 6, and the formation was designed so that no matter which way the Eternal Dominium turned, at least 2 rows of ships would maintain an unobstructed angle of fire. They had planned this formation specifically for a ship of his size. He hadn't thought about it until the very last moment, and the thought settled in his chest with a weight he hadn't felt in a very long time. "Identify them," he said. His sensor officer ran a scan. "Hull configurations do not match any registered vessel type in Dominium reconnaissance records. Drive technology corresponds to modified Vret propulsion systems. Weapon signatures indicate energy arrays of an unknown class." The officer paused again. "They did not appear in our probe data. They were built in secret, built where the probes never found." He thought about the dark side of the moon, a convenient place to hide that he had never specifically scanned because the moon was barren, uninhabited. And it wasn't worth the time to scan. The fleet opened fire. It hit the Eternal Dominium from 18 different points almost simultaneously. The shots were coordinated in the same layered cyclic pattern as the orbital platforms. Each hit arrived at a slightly different angle to a slightly different part of his deflection field, never giving the system time to fully recharge. The platforms were still firing from behind. Drones were still swarming around his secondary batteries, and now 18 warships were adding their fire to the pattern from the front. The Eternal Dominium shuddered so hard that Zarvok grabbed the armrest of his command chair. "Deflection field at 51%, his weapons officer said, and the calm in his voice had completely disappeared. Several arrays under heavy fire. Sectors 4 and 7 report local field collapse. Hull integrity holding." Zarvok brought up his tactical overview and forced himself to look at it clearly. He was surrounded. Platforms behind him, a fleet in front of him, clouds of drones filling the intermediate space, mine clusters limiting his maneuvering possibilities. He was a large, powerful ship with extraordinary firepower, and he was in the middle of a carefully constructed cage that had been created, he understood it now, fully, and without the possibility of comfortable denial specifically to hold exactly this type of ship he was commanding. He thought about the 130 civilizations that had come before. He thought about how simple those conquests were. He thought about the planets that had surrendered before the deadline. He thought about those who had fought back with their ships. Usually, they were a handful of small, poorly coordinated vessels that his gun crews had sent off with the professional ease of people doing a routine task. He thought about how the Vret Dominium had looked at Earth and seen the same thing it had always seen. A primitive world, easy prey, a number to add to the list. He thought about how 60 years of preparation had looked from the outside like a primitive world doing nothing. "Return fire," he said. "All main arrays. Focus on the lead ship." The remaining main arrays of the Eternal Dominium turned to the approaching fleet and fired. The volume of fire was still huge. Even with degraded sectors 4 and 7, the military ship's main armament was a weapon system that in previous battles had turned orbital defenses into steam. The energy pillars hit the lead ship's shield, and the ship jerked sideways, taking damage. Zarvok looked at the readings and saw that he had caused it harm, broken through the shield on one side, and inflicted real structural damage to the hull. But the lead ship didn't stop. It withstood the hit, corrected its trajectory, and kept approaching. On the bridge of the ESV Indomitable, Commander Hyun Song held firmly to the edge of her console and did not sit. The impact was strong. 3 decks on the port side had buckled. 2 of her secondary batteries were disabled. The shield reading showed a sharp drop on the port side, which her engineers were already working on. Her damage control officer was reporting casualties. 3 crew members had sustained non-critical injuries. "Hold formation," she told her helmsman. "Continue approach vector. Left shield at 32%, her weapons officer said. "I know," she said. "Continue movement." She had run this battle in simulation over 300 times. Not specifically this battle, she hadn't known when or how exactly the Vret would come. But battles of this type against a ship of this class and size. She knew the weapon cycle time of the Eternal Dominium. She knew the main arrays required 47 seconds for a full recharge cycle after a maximum discharge. She knew 47 seconds was enough time to close the distance between her current position and the position she needed. "All ships maintain their firing pattern," she said to the fleet command channel. "Do not let them reset the field. Continue the cycle." 15 of the 17 other ships confirmed. 2 were repositioning after taking significant damage in the first exchange. They would return to firing position in a minute. Song watched the range counter on her display. The Eternal Dominium was so large that even at this distance, she saw it on the direct optical image, a massive shape against the background of the stars. Still firing, still fighting. Vret ships did not break easily. She knew that from the data. The crew of this ship were soldiers, and they would not stop until they were forced to. She respected that, the way one soldier sometimes respects an enemy's commitment, even in the middle of trying to stop them. "Distance to primary target, 800 kilometers. Closing," said her navigation officer. "Prepare the flanking strike package," she said. The flanking strike package was something she had developed specifically based on studying the Vret deflection field architecture. A simultaneous multi-angle salvo from several ships that struck one target at angles that the field amplification algorithm mathematically could not defend against simultaneously. It required precise positioning and precise timing. It required every ship in the strike group to be exactly where it needed to be, exactly at the right moment. She had practiced it 312 times. "All ships in the strike group confirm positions," she said. 6 ships confirmed their positions were perfect. "Fire," she said. 6 ships fired simultaneously at 6 different angles at the hull of the Eternal Dominium. Each shot hit a point that the deflection field reinforcement system could not cover without leaving another point open. The combined effect was immediate and visible. Sections of the hull on the right side of the warship went dark as the field collapsed under the cascade of hits. The metal evaporated. Something structural broke. One of the rear main arrays of the Eternal Dominium went silent. Song watched the readings. The same pattern again. Turn 30 degrees. Strike group. Fire again. Zarvok felt the second strike before his instruments reported it. The Eternal Dominium shuddered with a force that was different from the steady beating of the previous exchange. This was not accumulated fire exhausting his defenses. This was a precise strike that found the geometry of his deflection field and folded it. He had never experienced such a thing before. He had never faced a situation where the enemy force so clearly understood his defensive architecture that they attacked it geometrically. Deflection field at 33%, his weapons officer said. In his voice, there was nothing left. Main arrays 2, 5, and 6 disabled. Confirmed through penetration in sectors 14 and 18. We have explosive decompression on decks 7, 8, and 9. Zarvok sat very quietly in his chair and stared at his tactical display. His situation was clear. He had 33% defensive power. He had lost 3 main arrays. He was receiving fire from several directions simultaneously, with no possibility of a maneuver that would change the battle's geometry. 18 human ships were approaching to close range, a distance where his size advantage became less significant because at close range, smaller ships could shoot at entire sections that weren't fully covered by the weakening deflection field. He needed to retreat, or he needed reinforcements. Open long-range communication, he said. Priority signal to High Overlord Vretnal. Report our status. Request immediate warlord intervention. The communication officer's voice was flat. Long-range communication array disabled. It was destroyed in the last exchange. Zarvok looked at the communication station. It was not a random hit. He looked through his memory for the strikes and found it. One specific shot at one specific angle that hit exactly where his long-range array was installed. Not the short-range array, not the sensors, but specifically the long-range array. They were purposefully targeting it. He thought about how they could have known where the long-range array was located on a Vret warship. He thought about the probe data again. He thought about a human scientist with 20, 30, 40 years of material to study. He thought about how one could know exactly where to shoot if you wanted to prevent a ship from calling for help. He felt something cold passing through him, which he recognized a moment later as the first real fear he had felt in years. Short-range communication, he said. Working, the officer said. Then broadcast on all frequencies, Zarvok said, to the human fleet. Tell them. He stopped. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at the readings. He looked at the 18 ships approaching, and the platform still firing from behind, and the cloud of drones still pushing through his secondary batteries. He made a decision. Tell them nothing, he said. He would not surrender to primitives. He would not add the eternal dominium to the history of Vret ships that had surrendered to an inferior civilization. That would not happen while he commanded this bridge. He turned to his engineering deck. Launch the self-destruct sequence, he said. Self-destruct initiated, Warlord. Silence fell on the bridge. Then his engineer officer said, Self-destruct accepted, Warlord. Initiating sequence. Detonation in. The ship shuddered, but it was not from an enemy hit. It was from something that squeezed the hull. What is that? Zarvok said. Kravis spoke. Deployment of a containment field detected. External origin. Human technology. Field. Another pause. This was the longest pause the onboard computer had made during the entire battle. The field physically prevents the propagation of the detonation sequence, the self-destruct. It contains the energy accumulated within permissible limits before detonation can occur. Zarvok stared at the ceiling of the bridge. They had a containment field designed to prevent self-destruct detonations. This meant they had foreseen he would try to self-destruct rather than surrender. This meant they had planned for that too. In Facility 7, Jian Cho watched the containment field readings and exhaled slowly. The containment array was her last project. It was barely 2 years old. Based on energy capture technology, the development of which had taken her longer than almost everything else she had built. The principle was simple. If you could build a strong enough absorbing field, you could catch an explosion before it had space to expand. In practice, it was extremely difficult to achieve, and she had never been entirely sure it would work on a full scale until this moment. It worked. She opened her communication channel to Park. Containment is holding. The eternal dominium is locked. Park's voice returned, quiet and calm. Good work, Dr. Cho. She looked at the readings of the Vret ship's status. 33% defensive power. Multiple breaches. Main weapons severely damaged. No long-range communication. Trapped in a containment field that would not allow it to detonate. She thought about what was on that ship technical data. Records of 130 conquered civilizations, navigation maps, intelligence on the Vret Dominium's military infrastructure, and troop concentration points. She thought about how much information had just fallen into human hands. She thought about the 130 civilizations that hadn't had 60 years to prepare. Her expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more serious than triumph. It was the expression of a person who understands that winning a battle is not the same as winning a war, and that what happens next is as important as what just happened. She turned back to her equipment and began preparing the next phase. Outside, in orbit, the Eternal Dominium sat locked and helpless in a field of human energy. Surrounded by ships that shouldn't have existed, defeated by technology the Vret Dominium had never imagined could be used against them. Zarvok sat in his command chair in the silence of a bridge that had stopped receiving good news an hour ago. And for the first time in his career, he had nothing else to do. Admiral Caleb Park opened the channel himself. He did not transmit it through a relay. He spoke in Vret, the Vret language that Dr. Jian Cho had compiled from 60 years of intercepted Dominium communications, the language that was part of Park's private study for the last 12 years, practiced in the early mornings before the rest of his staff arrived, practiced in the evenings, spoken to himself while walking the corridors of the command center, until he could speak the sounds with almost natural ease. He spoke it now over the short-range communication channels, directly to the Eternal Dominium. "Warlord Zarvok," he said. "I am Admiral Caleb Park, commander of the United Earth Defense Fleet. Your ship is contained, your weapons are disabled, your self-destruct is suppressed. You have no remaining offensive or defensive power. I offer you the opportunity to surrender and order your crew to lay down their arms and be taken aboard one of our ships as a prisoner of war. You and your crew will be treated in accordance with our laws. You will not be harmed." He waited. The channel was open. He heard the background sounds of the Eternal Dominium bridge, the low hum of systems, the quiet voices of officers talking to each other, the rare tone of an alarm. Then Zarvok's voice was heard. The Vret language had a special quality when spoken by someone in stress. The consonants became harder, the gaps between words became shorter. Zarvok's voice had both those qualities. "You are a primitive species," Zarvok said. "You live on one planet. You have existed in this galaxy for a negligible fraction of the time during which the Vret Dominium has ruled it. You do not offer terms to a warlord of the Dominium. You do not." "I am not offering terms," Park said. "I am offering mercy. There is a difference. Terms are negotiated. Mercy is given. You are not in a position to negotiate." He paused. "I will not make this offer again." Silence. Then Zarvok very quietly said, "The Dominium will send a fleet. It will take them time to realize what has happened here. When they do, they will come with force, and what you have done today will not matter." "Perhaps," Park said, "but today you are here, and they are not. Today, it is your decision. I advise you to take it carefully." The silence stretched for 30 seconds, then for a minute. Then Zarvok said, "The Vret Dominium does not surrender to primitives." Park closed his eyes for a second, not from disappointment, but from something more akin to quiet sadness, the feeling a soldier feels when a battle should not end the way it is ending, but ends that way regardless. He opened his eyes. "Understood," he said, and closed the channel. He turned to Minjun, who stood beside him at the tactical display. "Tell Jian to activate the array." Dr. Jian Cho had built the disintegration array over 7 years. She hadn't wanted to build it. She argued against it in early planning meetings. When the question of Earth's final defensive option first arose, she said the scale of the weapon was disproportionate, that the energy requirements were immense, that it was the type of weapon that shouldn't exist unless it was absolutely necessary. Admiral Park had listened carefully to her argument. Then he said, "You are right that it shouldn't exist unless it is necessary. Therefore, I want you to build it so that if it must exist, it exists and works, rather than existing and leaving us without a last option." She built it. The principle was an extension of the containment field technology, the same understanding of energy field interaction with matter, taken to the extreme. The containment field trapped energy before it could expand. The disintegration array did the opposite. It introduced a cascade of precisely tuned energy frequencies into the target's molecular bonds, disrupting those bonds at a fundamental level, turning matter into scattered particles that could not be reassembled. It didn't blow things up, it didn't burn them, and it didn't evaporate them. It dismantled them at an atomic level and scattered the components so thoroughly that nothing coherent remained. Jian had tested it on small objects in her lab. She had tested it on a stone the size of her fist, and after the test, she had looked at the space where the stone had been, and there was nothing there, not even dust, because even the dust had been scattered beyond what her instruments could detect. She sat quietly for a while after that test. Then she wrote down the results, filed them, and continued working, because that was what she did. She stood at the array control station and received the authorization code from Admiral Park. The code was correct. The system confirmed it. She began the activation sequence. The array was not a single weapon, it was distributed. The components were placed in 12 orbital platforms linked to a coordinated firing system that Jian had designed to ensure the energy cascade reached every part of the target. Simultaneously, the Eternal Dominium was almost 4 kilometers long. Reaching every part of it simultaneously required precise geometry and precise timing. She had calibrated the geometry and timing many times. "System ready," she said into the command channel. Park's voice returned. "Fire when ready, Jian." She looked at the display showing the Eternal Dominium, locked in the containment field. She thought about the crew on that ship, about the soldiers who hadn't chosen to come to Earth, who were sent here by a supreme ruler who treated civilizations as items to be collected. She thought about the 130 civilizations that had been collected. She thought about the Republic of Selene, the last of the people who had sent their leaders in small ships to beg for mercy that was not granted. She pressed the activation key. 12 platforms fired in one coordinated salvo that lasted 3 seconds. The Eternal Dominium did not explode. There was no dramatic fireball, no expanding cloud of debris, no shockwave. There was a brief, very intense pulse of light that the direct optical feed showed clearly, a pale, blue-white flash that enveloped the shape of the ship, and then the light vanished. The ship was gone, not damaged, not destroyed, in the ordinary sense, just gone. The space where 30 seconds ago a 4-kilometer warship had been was now just empty space. The containment field no longer had anything to contain. The mine clusters and drones found no remaining target. The orbital platforms adjusted their scans and confirmed what the optical feed had shown. There was nothing there. Jian stood at her station for a long time. Then she said into the command channel, "Target eliminated. No residual materials detected." She heard Park's quiet reply, "Thank you, Jian." She turned off her station's display, sat in her chair, and said nothing more for a while. The search took 3 days, not because they expected to find the ship they didn't, but because a complete record of the battle required an absence of debris. Earth sent collection drones through the entire volume of the engagement, scanning on all available frequencies, checking for any piece of material large enough to be identified as part of the Eternal Dominium. They found the remnants of the shots. They found pieces of the platforms that had been destroyed in the early battle. They found traces of drones. They found nothing from the Vret ship. Not one armor plate, not one power element, not one structural component or data core, not one fragment of equipment, nothing. On the 4th day after the battle, Admiral Park sat in his office with the final search report in front of him and a cup of coffee that, for once, was warm. He read the report carefully. The language was technical and precise, devoid of emotion, as always in official reports, and the conclusion was formulated in one sentence at the end. Within the search volume, no recoverable materials of the target vessel have been found. He closed the report. He thought about what to do next. The answer was in the planning documents from 20 years ago. He opened the prepared message file, reviewed it once, changed 3 words, and then sat for a while longer. The message had to reach the Vret Dominium. The Eternal Dominium had destroyed its long-range communication array before being defeated, or rather, before Jian's targeting device destroyed it for them. So the ship itself couldn't be used to transmit anything, but Earth had other options. The deep space arrays were designed for transmission as well as detection. 12 arrays, located on the outskirts of the solar system, each capable of transmitting on Vret communication frequencies. The message would reach Vret space in approximately 48 hours. Park finalized the message and sent it to the transmission station. Then he opened another document that was not addressed to the Vret Dominium. The message to the Vret Dominium was short. It was written in the language of Warlord Zarvok, in Park's meticulous Vret, and was also translated into 11 other galactic languages that Earth's communication analysts had gathered from 60 years of intercepted signals. Languages spoken by civilizations the Vret Dominium had conquered or threatened or was currently observing. The message read, "The warship Eternal Dominium entered Earth's solar system 97 hours ago and delivered a demand for the surrender of this planet. Earth did not surrender. A battle occurred. Earth search teams have completed a thorough review of the engagement volume. No debris from the Eternal Dominium has been found. No debris, no materials. The Eternal Dominium and its crew no longer exist in any form that can be recovered. The message paused, and then continued. The Vret Dominium believed that one ship was enough to conquer this world. They held this belief because they had defeated every civilization they had encountered without serious resistance. Earth spent 60 years preparing to be the exception. We knew your technology. We studied it. We improved it. We built our defenses in silence and waited. Another pause. We have detailed technical data on the design of Vret warships. We have data on the combat effectiveness of this battle. We have mapping data on Vret communication frequencies. We have, since the containment period, gained some access to the data architecture of the Eternal Dominium before it was destroyed, and we have processed this data. And finally, Earth is not a primitive world. Earth has never been a primitive world. We chose to appear as such. We will defend this planet against any force you choose to send. We will continue to improve. We will continue to prepare. You may choose to come again with more ships, with greater forces. That is your decision, but understand this clearly. The result will not change. It will just cost you more. The message ended. Park sent it. Then he opened another document, one not addressed to the Vret Dominium, but to other civilizations, the ones whose languages Earth had learned, the ones whose long-range communication frequencies Earth's analysts had been tracking for decades. Those who had been absorbed by or threatened by the Empire, or who lived in the shadow of an empire that never lost battles. Until now. This message was different. It was shorter. It was not a warning and not a threat. It was 3 sentences. The Vret Dominium is not invincible. Earth defeated them today with technology built on 60 years of preparation and study. If your civilization has survived, you have time. Use it. He also sent this message. In the throne room of the central military station of the Vret Dominium, High Overlord Vretnal sat alone. He had received the final distress signal from Kravis 16 hours before Earth's message arrived. The signal was fragmented and incomplete. The last transmission that managed to get through before the ship's communication array went down contained combat data, partial sensor readings, and records of system failures. The data abruptly cut off in the middle of the transmission, and there was nothing after that. 46 hours of silence. And then, Earth's message. He read it himself, without advisors. He had it set to run. He sat in his throne room and read the message, and then remained seated for a long time after he had finished. 130 victories. He thought about what this message meant. He thought about the reconnaissance probe from 6 months ago, the one that, as the analyst Voskra had suggested, might have been shot down. He thought about how he had dismissed that report. He thought about how the Dominium had looked at Earth for 60 years and seen nothing worthy of serious attention, and how Earth had used those 60 years to become something that should have been taken very seriously. He thought about the message he hadn't yet responded to, and the message that had been sent to other civilizations, those under the Dominium's control or under the Dominium's threat, and what it would mean when those civilizations received it. He thought about Earth saying they had data from the architecture of the Eternal Dominium, just the navigation maps, routes, coordinates, locations of Dominium military installations and fleet concentration points represented an intelligence breakthrough of a scale the Dominium had never experienced. He thought about many things. He had no easy answers for any of it. After a long time, he stood, walked to the window of the throne room, and looked out at space. The same space he had looked at his entire life. The space that had always been his empire. The space through which 130 conquest ships had traveled without a single defeat. 130 victories, 1 defeat. He had no idea what to do with that. All his understanding of the Vret Dominium's position in the galaxy was built on the premise that the Dominium does not lose. Civilizations that submitted did so because they believed the Dominium could not be stopped. Civilizations that briefly resisted were destroyed quickly enough that resistance never became a story that other civilizations could point to. The Dominium's strength was partly military, but equally built on certainty unshakable, undeniable certainty that resistance was useless. Earth had broken that certainty. 1 planet, 1 battle, 1 ship sent as an insult, without even debris. He stood at the window for a very long time. On the deck of the Indomitable in low orbit above the blue-white planet, Commander Hyun Song stood by a viewport and looked at the stars. The battle was over. Her ship was being repaired. Hull sections were being patched, damaged batteries were being replaced. The wounded crew members were under care in the med bay. Around her, the fleet was in the same state. Every ship had sustained damage. 2 ships had received serious damage and were being directed back to the moon base. 3 crew members across the fleet had died. She had read their names twice. She would read them again tonight and again tomorrow, and would carry them, just as she had carried the names of everyone she was responsible for who hadn't survived. She thought about the Vret crew. She thought about Zarvok, who had been offered mercy and had refused, and what that said about him and the empire that created him. She didn't feel triumph about what had happened to them. She felt something more complex, the weight of a serious act committed in a necessary moment. A weight that didn't go away quickly and probably shouldn't. She thought about the 130 civilizations. She thought about the message Admiral Park had sent them. You have time. Use it. She hoped they had heard it. She hoped some of them were still capable of hearing it, that enough of them had survived in some form, even under Dominium rule, to find the signal and understand it. She hoped that somewhere in some system she had never heard of, a scientist was sitting in a lab with a piece of technology that didn't belong to their civilization, and carefully taking it apart, asking the right questions. The stars were very bright from here, clean and distant and incredibly numerous. Every sun, most of them with worlds revolving around them. On some of those worlds lived people who were going about their business, not knowing that the silent empire that had ruled their corner of the galaxy for a long time had just encountered something it had never encountered before. A wall that had been built with patience and stubbornness and a particular human tenacity in preparing for the worst possible outcome, and then refusing to accept it, even when it came to the door. Song stood by the viewport for a while longer. Then she turned and walked back to her command station, because there was still work to be done, damage reports to review, resupply schedules to coordinate, after-action analyses to write. The 1,001 practical things that followed a battle and required processing from the commander. She sat in her chair and opened her display. Outside the viewport, the stars continued to burn. Earth was still there, still standing. After everything, still standing. And somewhere in the distances between the stars, traveling at the speed of light through the darkness, was a message carrying 3 sentences to civilizations that had long been told that there was no point in hoping. You have time. Use it.